I've been out of the service for almost 6 years now, and there's something that happened during my time stationed up in Washington that I've never talked about. Not to my wife, not to my buddies from the unit, not to anyone. But lately, it's been eating at me, like this weight I've been carrying around, and I figure maybe it's time to get it off my chest. I was stationed at this remote base near the Canadian border back in winter 2019. Can't tell you exactly where. Some things you just don't talk about even years later. But it was one of those places where civilization just kind of peters out and the wilderness takes over. We're talking deep Pacific Northwest, the kind of country where the trees are so thick you can't see the sky half the time, and when winter hits, it hits hard. The thing about being stationed somewhere like that is you get used to the isolation. Most guys either love it or hate it. There's not much middle ground. Me, I actually liked it. Grew up hunting and fishing back home, so being surrounded by all that untouched forest felt natural. But even I had to admit, there was something about those woods that felt different. Maybe it was just the sheer size of the place, or the way sound traveled weird through all those trees. But sometimes you'd get this feeling like you were being watched. We did a lot of training exercises out there. Standard stuff mostly. Survival training, navigation, cold weather operations. The brass figured if you could handle those mountains in winter, you could handle just about anywhere. They weren't wrong. I've been in some harsh places since then, but nothing quite like those woods in February when the snow's 3 feet deep and the temperature hasn't been above freezing in weeks. This particular exercise was supposed to be routine. 6 of us, 3 days in the field, basic patrol and survival training. We'd done it dozens of times before. The weather forecast was calling for heavy snow, but that was pretty much standard for that time of year. Our squad leader was this guy who'd been there longer than anyone, knew those mountains like the back of his hand. If he said we were good to go, we trusted him. The funny thing is, looking back, there were signs something was off from the very beginning. Radio communication was spotty, which wasn't unusual given the terrain, but it seemed worse than normal. And the wildlife, usually you'd see tracks, hear birds, something. But from day one, it was like the forest had just emptied out, dead quiet except for the wind and our own footsteps crunching through the snow. By day 3, we were about 15 miles from base, following this old deer trail through some of the thickest forest I've ever seen. The trees were so dense the snow was lighter on the ground, but what had fallen was packed and icy. We were making good time though, and honestly, I was already thinking ahead to getting back to base, getting warm, maybe grabbing a hot meal. That's when we caught the smell. Now, I've been around a lot of different animals in my time. Deer, bear, elk, you name it. This wasn't like any of those. It was musky, sure, but stronger. More, I don't know how to describe it. More human, maybe, but wrong somehow. Like body odor mixed with wet animal fur and something else I couldn't place. At first we figured maybe there was a dead animal nearby, but then we started seeing the blood. It wasn't just a little blood either. We're talking about patches of red snow scattered across maybe 50 yards, with drag marks leading deeper into the woods. Heavy drag marks, like something big had been pulled along the ground. The blood trail was unlike anything I'd seen before. Way too much for a deer or even an elk. That's when we found the footprints. I mean, we all stopped dead when we saw them. They were huge, at least twice the size of a man's boot, maybe bigger. But they weren't bear tracks either. They looked almost human, but the proportions were all wrong. Too wide, too long, with what looked like toe marks that were way bigger than they should have been. Our squad leader stood there staring at those tracks for a long time. You could tell he was thinking hard, trying to figure out what we were looking at. Finally, he made the call to follow the trail. Probably should have radioed it in first, but like I said, communication was already sketchy, and besides, what were we going to say? Hey base, we found some weird footprints and blood, send backup? They'd have laughed us off the radio. so we followed the trail deeper into the woods. The blood and drag marks led us maybe another quarter mile to the small clearing near a frozen creek. There was more blood here, a lot more, and broken branches hanging down from about 8 or 10 feet up. Some of them looked like they'd been snapped clean in half. Whatever had been through here was big and strong enough to break branches that were thicker than my arm. That's when we heard it. This sound coming from a thick patch of trees on the far side of the clearing. At first it sounded like heavy breathing, but labored, like whatever was making it was hurt or exhausted. We all just froze and listened. I remember thinking it had to be a bear. Had to be. Maybe it had gotten into a fight with another bear, or gotten caught in some kind of trap. That would explain the blood and the broken branches. Bears could rear up on their hind legs, right? Maybe that explained the weird footprints too. But even as I was thinking this, something in my gut was telling me it wasn't right. The breathing didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard, and those footprints, they were just too human-looking. Our squad leader motioned for us to spread out and approach the sound carefully. We had our weapons ready. Standard procedure when you're dealing with potentially wounded wildlife. A hurt animal is a dangerous animal, and if it really was a bear, we needed to be prepared for anything. We moved through the clearing slowly, boots crunching in the snow, trying to stay quiet, but knowing it was impossible in those conditions. The breathing sound got louder as we got closer, and I could hear something else too, like small groaning sounds, almost like someone in pain. The trees were thick where the sound was coming from, branches hanging low and tangled together. We had to push through slowly, trying not to make too much noise. I was maybe 10 feet from the source of the sound when I finally saw it. I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. There was this massive shape slumped against a fallen log, partially hidden by the low-hanging branches. At first glance, yeah, it could have been a bear. It was big enough. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light under the trees, I realized it wasn't shaped like any bear I'd ever seen. It was sitting upright, almost like a person would sit, but bigger, a lot bigger. Even sitting down, it had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. And it was covered in dark brown, almost black hair that looked thick and coarse. But the shape of it, the shoulders, the arms, the way it was positioned, it looked more human than animal. And then it noticed us. I'll never forget that moment. It turned its head toward us, and I found myself looking into these eyes that were definitely not animal eyes. They were intelligent eyes, aware, and they were looking right at me. The face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not quite human, but not animal either. The features were heavy, primitive looking, but there was something undeniably intelligent about the expression. The nose was broad and flat, the brow ridge pronounced, and the entire face was covered in that same coarse dark hair. But those eyes, they held a depth that sent chills down my spine. For maybe 10 seconds, nobody moved. Not us, not it. We all just stared at each other in complete silence. I remember my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My finger was on the trigger of my rifle, but I couldn't seem to make myself move. The creature's breathing was heavy and labored, and I could see its massive chest rising and falling with each breath. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, had to be twice as wide as any human's. The arms were long and powerful looking, covered in that thick, dark fur, and ended in hands that looked almost human but were easily 3 times the size of mine. The creature, and by now it was pretty clear this wasn't any kind of normal animal, didn't seem aggressive. It just looked tired, hurt. There was pain in those eyes and something else. Fear, maybe. It was scared of us. As we stood there in that frozen moment, I noticed it was favoring its left side, keeping its weight off one leg. The smell was stronger now that we were close. That musky animal odor mixed with something else. the metallic smell of blood, and underneath it all, something that reminded me of human sweat, but different, wilder. That's when I noticed the injury. Its left leg was covered in blood, and there was something metallic glinting in the wound. Even from where I was standing, I could see it was bad. Real bad. There was dried blood caked all around the injury and fresh blood still seeping out. The creature had one massive hand pressed against the wound like it was trying to stop the bleeding. I heard one of the guys behind me whisper something under his breath, probably a prayer or a curse, I couldn't tell which. We were all thinking the same thing. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't exist. But there it was, right in front of us, bleeding and hurt, and looking at us like it was trying to figure out if we were going to help or hurt it. Our squad leader was the first to move. He slowly lowered his weapon and took a small step forward. The creature tensed up when he moved, but it didn't try to run or attack. It just watched him with those intelligent eyes. That's when the debate started. Well, not really a debate. More like urgent, whispered arguments about what the hell we were supposed to do. A couple of the guys wanted to leave immediately, just back away slowly and pretend we never saw anything. One guy thought we should call it in right away, get some kind of backup out there. Another thought we should try to get pictures or video, some kind of proof. But I kept looking at that wound. It was infected. That much was obvious even from a distance. The creature was weak, losing blood, and from the looks of things, it had been suffering for days, maybe longer. One of our guys had been a medic before he transferred to our unit. He was staring at the creature with this expression I'd never seen before, like he was torn between fear and professional instinct. Finally, he looked at our squad leader and said he thought the thing was dying. That infection looked bad, and it had lost a lot of blood. The weird thing was, the creature seemed to understand we were talking about it. Its head moved back and forth between us as we whispered like it was following the conversation even if it couldn't understand the words. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, our medic made a decision. He started moving slowly toward the creature, his hands visible and empty. The rest of us kept our weapons ready but lowered, watching to see what would happen. The creature watched him approach but didn't move away. When he got within about 6 feet, he stopped and just looked at it for a moment. Then he pointed at the wound and made some kind of gesture like he wanted to help. I swear that thing understood. It looked at the medic, then at the wound, then back at the medic. And then slowly, it moved its hand away from the injury. What we saw made me sick to my stomach. There was a metal trap or snare embedded deep in the creature's leg, and the wound around it was infected and festering. The trap looked like some kind of illegal poaching equipment, the kind of thing that's designed to clamp down and not let go. The creature had obviously been struggling to get free for days, maybe weeks, and the metal had cut deep into the muscle and bone. Our medic took one look at that wound and started pulling supplies out of his pack. The creature watched him the whole time, never taking its eyes off his hands. There was this incredible intelligence in the way it observed everything he did. Not the blank stare of an animal, but the focused attention of someone trying to understand what was happening. When our medic first approached with the antiseptic, the creature pulled back slightly. You could see the wariness in its posture, the way its massive shoulders tensed up. But then our medic did something smart. He held up the bottle and pointed to his own arm, then made a washing motion like he was showing what he intended to do. The creature watched this demonstration, tilted its head slightly, and then slowly extended its injured leg. The trust that took was incredible. Here was this powerful creature that could have easily overpowered any of us, allowing a complete stranger to approach its most vulnerable spot. And the way it watched our medic work, studying his face, his movements, like it was trying to read his intentions. When he started cleaning the wound, it made these low sounds, not aggressive, more like it was acknowledging that it hurt, but understanding that the medic was trying to help. The sounds were almost conversational, like it was trying to communicate with him. Sometimes it would grunt softly when he hit a particularly painful spot, but it never pulled away or showed any sign of wanting to stop the treatment. What really got to me was how it would look back and forth between our medic's face and his hands, like it was constantly reassessing whether this human could be trusted. And occasionally, when the pain got bad, it would close those intelligent eyes and grip the fallen log it was leaning against with its free hand. The wood would creak under the pressure of that grip, reminding us all just how strong this thing was. The creature's hands were probably the most human-like thing about it. Sure, they were massive, each finger was as thick as a man's wrist, but the way it used them was so familiar. It would gesture sometimes while our medic worked, pointing at different parts of the wound or making motions toward the forest, like it was trying to explain how the injury had happened. At one point, our medic needed to get a better angle on the wound, and he gently guided the creature's leg into a different position. The creature not only allowed this, but actually helped, shifting its weight and holding the leg where our medic needed it. The level of cooperation was unbelievable. The whole process took over an hour and a half. The rest of us formed a perimeter around them, partly to watch for threats, but mostly because we were still trying to process what we were seeing. Here was our medic treating a creature that shouldn't exist, and that creature was letting him do it. More than that, it was actively participating, helping however it could. During the treatment, we all got a better look at the creature's build and features. Even sitting down and injured, it was clear this thing was built for power. The muscle definition visible through its fur was incredible, like a bodybuilder, but on a scale that didn't seem possible. Its legs, even the injured one, were tree trunk thick. The feet were enormous, with what looked like thick calluses on the soles, like it spent most of its time walking on rough terrain. But it was the small details that really stuck with me. The way it would occasionally brush its hair away from its face with the back of its hand, almost like a human gesture. How it would tilt its head when listening to sounds from the forest that we couldn't hear. The fact that it seemed to understand that our medic's equipment was helping. It would actually lean forward sometimes to get a better look at what he was doing, like it was curious about our human tools and techniques. While he worked, the creature would occasionally point toward the forest, toward the direction the blood trail had come from. It was trying to tell us something, but we couldn't understand what. Maybe showing us where it had come from, or where the trap had been set. The trap itself was definitely illegal hunting equipment, not the kind of thing you'd see in any sporting goods store. This was heavy-duty stuff, probably set by poachers looking for bear or elk. But it was set wrong, or maybe the creature had stumbled into it by accident. Either way, it had done serious damage. Our medic managed to clean most of the infection and bandage the wound, but he couldn't do anything about the trap itself. It was embedded too deep, and he didn't have the tools to cut through that kind of metal. The best he could do was stabilize the injury and give the creature some antibiotics from his kit. The whole time this was going on, the weather was getting worse. The snow was coming down heavier, and the wind was picking up. We were supposed to check in with base every few hours, and we were already overdue for our next scheduled contact. That's when things started getting complicated. Our radio crackled to life, with base trying to reach us for our status report. We looked at each other, none of us knowing what to say. How do you explain that you're performing first aid on a Bigfoot? Our squad leader finally responded that we were dealing with an injured animal and would be delayed, but he kept it vague. While he was on the radio, some of the guys were getting antsy about documenting what we were seeing. A couple of them had cameras and they wanted to take pictures. But every time someone reached for a camera, the creature would tense up and look agitated. It was like it understood what cameras were and didn't want its picture taken. Our squad leader made the call that there would be no photos. Whatever this thing was, it deserved some privacy. Looking back, I think that was the right decision, even though part of me wishes we had some proof of what happened. By the time our medic finished working on the wound, it was getting dark. The creature looked better, not good, but better. It was sitting up straighter, and some of the pain seemed to have left its eyes. When our medic packed up his supplies, the creature made this sound, kind of like a low rumble, and reached out to briefly touch his shoulder, like it was saying thank you. That's when we heard the other sounds. At first, it was just distant calls echoing through the forest, not like any animal sounds I'd ever heard before. More like voices, but not human voices. The creature heard them too and immediately became alert, turning its head toward the sounds and making similar calls in response. The calls got closer, and we started seeing movement in the trees around the clearing. Shadows that didn't belong, shapes moving between the trunks that were too big to be normal wildlife. Our creature friend was making more sounds now, louder ones like it was calling out to whatever was approaching. I don't mind admitting we were all pretty nervous at this point. We dealt with one of these things and it had been hurt and relatively docile. But now there were others, and we didn't know how they'd react to finding us with their injured companion. 2 more creatures emerged from the tree line on the far side of the clearing. The first thing that struck me was how different they looked from each other, even though they were obviously the same species. The one that emerged first was smaller than our injured friend, maybe 7 feet tall instead of 8, and its hair was lighter colored, more brown than black. There was something distinctly different about its build too. Where our injured creature was massively built and clearly male, this one had a different body structure. More slender through the torso, though still incredibly powerful looking. The way it moved was different too, more graceful, more careful. The second creature to emerge was smaller still, maybe 6 feet tall, and moved with a kind of energy that reminded me of a teenager. Its hair was lighter still, almost a reddish brown, and it stayed close to the larger newcomer like it was seeking protection or guidance. The way it looked around the clearing with wide eyes, taking everything in, made me think it was young, maybe even seeing humans for the first time. But what really got my attention was how they positioned themselves. The larger of the 2 newcomers immediately placed itself between us and the injured creature, while the smaller one moved to the injured creature's other side. It wasn't aggressive positioning exactly, but it was definitely protective. They were assessing us as a potential threat while also clearly caring for their injured family member. The injured creature immediately began making sounds when it saw them, not the low grunts it had made during the medical treatment, but more complex vocalizations. It was hard to describe, but they sounded almost like words, just not words in any language I'd ever heard. There were patterns to the sounds, inflections that reminded me of conversation. The larger newcomer responded with its own series of sounds, and I swear it sounded like questions. The tone was different, higher pitched at the end of phrases, like it was asking what had happened. Our injured friend responded by pointing at its bandaged leg, then at us, then making what seemed like longer, more detailed vocalizations. During this exchange, the smaller creature, the young one, kept staring at us with undisguised curiosity. It would peer around the larger one to get a better look, and at one point it made soft sounds that almost sounded like questions directed at us. The larger creature would occasionally make sharp, quieter sounds toward the young one, and it would step back, but its attention never left us. What amazed me was watching them examine their injured family member. The larger newcomer approached slowly and began inspecting the bandaged wound, making soft sounds that seemed approving. It looked at our medic's work, then at our medic himself, and I could see something like gratitude in its expression. The young one was more direct. It moved right up to the injured creature and began what looked like comforting behavior, gently touching its shoulders and making soft, soothing sounds. But the intelligence in their interactions was what really struck me. The injured creature wasn't just making random sounds, it was clearly explaining what had happened. It would point toward different parts of the forest, gesture at the trap still embedded in its leg, then point at us and mimic our medic's cleaning motions. The other two would respond with their own vocalizations, and you could see them processing the information, understanding the story. At one point, the larger newcomer approached us, not aggressively, but with obvious caution. It stopped about 10 feet away and made a series of sounds while looking directly at our squad leader. The tone was different from the family conversation we'd been hearing, more formal maybe, like it was trying to communicate directly with us. Our squad leader, not knowing what else to do, nodded and said, "You're welcome," in a normal speaking voice. The creature tilted its head at the sound of human speech, clearly recognizing that we had our own way of communicating even if it couldn't understand the words. Then something incredible happened. The larger creature placed one of its massive hands over its heart and bowed its head slightly toward us. The gesture was unmistakable. It was thanking us. The young one watched this interaction with fascination, then mimicked the gesture, placing its much smaller hand over its own heart and nodding toward us. I felt something shift in that moment. These weren't just intelligent animals. They had culture, social behaviors, ways of expressing gratitude and respect that translated across species. They understood concepts like debt and appreciation in ways that seemed almost human. The injured creature struggled to its feet with help from the other two, and watching them work together was remarkable. The larger newcomer positioned itself on the injured side, taking most of the weight, while the younger one supported from the other side. They moved with practiced coordination like they'd done this before. The injured creature was obviously still in significant pain, but with their help, it was mobile. As they prepared to leave, there was another exchange of vocalizations between all three of them. This time, the conversation included gestures toward us, and I got the distinct impression they were discussing us, not in a threatening way, but like they were trying to figure out what to make of humans who had helped rather than harmed. The young one seemed particularly interested in our equipment. It kept looking at our medic's pack, at our weapons, at our uniforms. At one point, it made questioning sounds toward the adults, like it was asking about these strange bipedal creatures it had encountered. The responses seemed to be explanatory, educational even. What struck me most was how the injured creature looked at each of us individually before they started to leave. Not just a glance, but real eye contact with every member of our squad. Like it was memorizing our faces, making sure it would remember each of the humans who had helped it. When those intelligent eyes met mine, I felt like I was being seen and acknowledged as an individual, not just as part of a group. The larger newcomer did something similar, making eye contact with each of us and giving that slight head nod again. But when it looked at our medic, it did something different. It reached into the thick hair around its neck and pulled out what looked like a small, carved piece of wood or bone. It held it out toward our medic, clearly offering it as a gift. Our medic looked uncertain, not sure if he should accept it. But the creature kept holding it out, making encouraging sounds, so finally he stepped forward and took it. The moment he accepted the gift, all three creatures made sounds that I can only describe as pleased or approving. When I saw the carved piece later, it was incredible. Not crude at all, but intricately detailed with patterns that looked almost like writing or symbols. It was smooth from handling, like it had been carried for a long time. Our medic kept it, and as far as I know, he still has it somewhere. As we continued backing toward the edge of the clearing, the three creatures started moving in the opposite direction toward the deeper forest. They moved as a unit now, the two healthy ones supporting their injured family member. But they didn't just disappear immediately. They would stop every so often and look back at us, and we'd pause our retreat to watch them. The injured one looked back the most often. At one point, it raised one of its massive hands in what looked almost like a wave, or maybe a salute. The gesture was held long enough that there was no mistaking it. This was a farewell, a final acknowledgement of what had passed between us. The young one copied the gesture, waving with obvious enthusiasm. The larger one was more reserved, but it too gave us a final nod before they all turned and disappeared into the darkness between the trees. We stood there for several minutes after they vanished, listening to the sounds of their movement fade away into the forest. Occasionally we'd hear distant calls, their voices carrying through the trees as they traveled. And then gradually even those sounds faded, and we were left alone in the clearing with only the wind and the falling snow. We watched them disappear into the trees, and then the forest went quiet again. Not just normal quiet, that same eerie silence we'd noticed at the beginning of the exercise. Like every other living thing in those woods knew to stay hidden when those creatures were around. But this time the silence felt different, less ominous maybe, more respectful, like the forest itself was acknowledging what had just taken place. We stood there for a long time after they'd gone, none of us quite ready to move or speak. I think we were all trying to process what we'd just experienced. The whole encounter had probably lasted less than 3 hours from start to finish, but it felt like we'd lived through something that had fundamentally changed us. Finally, our squad leader broke the silence by checking his watch and reminding us we needed to get back on schedule. But as we gathered our gear and prepared to leave the clearing, you could see everyone was moving differently, more carefully, more aware of their surroundings, like we'd all suddenly realized we were visitors in someone else's home. Our medic packed up his remaining supplies quietly, but I noticed him checking his inventory. He'd used up most of his antibiotics, a significant amount of his bandaging material, and nearly all of his antiseptic. That was going to be hard to explain in his after-action report, but he didn't seem concerned about it. When one of the other guys asked if he thought the treatment would help, he just nodded and said he thought the creature had a good chance of healing up properly now that the infection was cleaned out. As we made our way back to the patrol route, we kept looking over our shoulders. Not out of fear exactly, but more like we were hoping for one more glimpse of something extraordinary. The forest felt alive around us in a way it hadn't before. Every sound, every shadow, every movement in the trees made us wonder if we were being observed. And maybe we were. About halfway back to our planned route, we heard those distant calls again. The same kind of vocalizations we'd heard from the creatures, but fainter now, coming from deeper in the forest. They didn't sound distressed or alarmed, just communicative. Like they were letting others know what had happened, passing along information through some kind of network we couldn't see or understand. One of the guys mentioned that he'd heard similar calls on previous exercises, but had always assumed they were just unusual bird sounds or maybe elk. Now we were all wondering how many times we'd been in those woods while creatures like this were nearby, watching us, staying hidden. How many times had we walked right past them without ever knowing they were there? The trek back to base took longer than usual because we kept stopping to examine things we'd previously ignored. Broken branches that were too high and too thick to have been damaged by normal wildlife. Areas where the underbrush was flattened in patterns that didn't match any animal trails we knew. Scuff marks on tree trunks that were 8 or 9 feet off the ground, like something tall had brushed against them. We found 3 more sets of the large footprints on our way back, all in areas we'd passed through on our way out without noticing them. Either the creatures had followed our route after we'd passed, or we'd been too focused on our mission objectives to see what was right in front of us. Both possibilities were unsettling in their own way. When we finally made it back to base, our squad leader called us together before we went to debrief. He looked at each of us carefully, and you could see he was weighing his words. Finally, he said that what we'd experienced out there was something that needed to stay between us. Not because it was classified or because we'd done anything wrong, but because no one would believe us, and trying to prove it would only cause problems for everyone involved. He was right, and we all knew it. Even among ourselves, talking about what we'd seen felt surreal. How do you explain to someone that you spent an hour and a half providing medical care to a creature that's supposed to be a myth? How do you describe the intelligence in those eyes, the obvious family bonds between the creatures, the gratitude they expressed? The official debrief went smoothly. We reported that we'd encountered an injured animal and provided first aid, which had caused us to fall behind schedule. When the debrief officer asked what kind of animal, our squad leader said it appeared to be a large bear that had gotten caught in some kind of illegal trap or snare. The officer made a note about reporting the poaching equipment to the appropriate authorities, and that was the end of it. But in the days and weeks that followed, the experience continued to affect all of us in different ways. Our medic became obsessed with learning more about wilderness first aid and emergency medicine, like the encounter had awakened some deeper calling. A couple of the other guys started reading everything they could find about unexplained animal sightings and cryptozoology, though they were careful not to be obvious about it. For me, the biggest change was in how I thought about intelligence and consciousness. Before the encounter, I'd never really considered that there might be other forms of awareness out there that we didn't recognize or understand. But looking into those eyes, seeing the complex social interactions between the creatures, watching them problem solve and communicate, it made me realize how much we don't know about the world around us. I started paying more attention to the behavior of animals I encountered on later exercises, really watching them instead of just noting their presence. And I began to notice things I'd missed before, the way ravens seemed to communicate complex information across long distances, how elk moved in patterns that suggested planning and coordination beyond simple herd instincts, the way even smaller animals like squirrels and chipmunks had what looked like individual personalities and social relationships. But it was the memory of that injured creature that stayed with me most strongly. The way it had looked at each of us before leaving, like it was memorizing our faces. The trust it had shown in allowing our medic to treat its wound. The obvious pain it had been in, and the relief that had shown in its posture as the treatment progressed. Sometimes I'd find myself wondering about the details we'd missed or hadn't had time to observe. What did their living arrangements look like? Did they have permanent settlements somewhere deeper in the forest, or were they nomadic? How many of them were there? Did they have their own forms of medicine or healing practices? What had they thought of our human tools and techniques? The carved piece that our medic had been given became a source of ongoing fascination for those of us who knew about it. He'd shown it to us privately, and we'd all been amazed by the intricacy of the work. The patterns carved into it weren't random. They had a structure and complexity that suggested some form of writing or symbolic system. But more than that, the fact that it had been given as a gift showed a level of cultural sophistication that challenged everything we thought we knew about intelligence and civilization. The strangest part was how it changed the way we thought about those forests. Before the encounter, the woods had felt empty, isolated, but afterward we knew they weren't empty at all. There was a whole other world out there that most people never saw, a world that had been there all along, just hidden. We all finished our tours and went our separate ways over the following months. I kept in touch with a few of the guys for a while, but we never talked about the encounter. It was like this unspoken agreement that what had happened out there stayed out there. But I've never forgotten it, never stopped thinking about that creature and the look in its eyes when our medic was treating its wound. The intelligence there, the gratitude, the pain. And I've wondered over the years what happened to it, whether our treatment helped, whether it healed up okay, whether it's still out there somewhere in those deep woods. I've also thought a lot about what it means that something like that exists. All the stories and legends about creatures in the wilderness, things our ancestors talked about but that we dismiss as superstition. Maybe they weren't all just stories. Looking back, I think we did the right thing. We helped a living being that was suffering, and we kept its secret. Whether it was some kind of unknown primate, a relic species, or something else entirely, it deserved to live its life without being hunted down by researchers or trophy hunters or curiosity seekers. But the experience changed me, made me think differently about the natural world and our place in it. There's so much we don't know, so much that exists beyond our understanding, and maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. I still go hiking and camping, still love being out in the wilderness. But I pay attention differently now. I listen more carefully to the sounds of the forest, watch for signs that something unusual might be nearby. Not because I'm hoping for another encounter. Honestly, I'm not sure I could handle that again. But because I've learned that the woods are full of secrets and you never know what you might stumble across. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. I usually just shrug and say I try to keep an open mind. But the truth is, I don't have to believe in it. I've seen it. I've looked into its eyes and watched it communicate with its family and seen it accept help from strangers who could have been threats. I know it's real because I was there when we found it bleeding in the snow and helped patch it up so it could go home to its family. And that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, whether I ever talk about it publicly or not. The world is bigger and stranger than most of us realize. There are things out there in the wild places that science hasn't cataloged, things that our ancestors knew about but that we've forgotten or dismissed. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe some things are meant to stay hidden, to live their lives away from our cameras and our curiosity and our need to classify and study everything. All I know is that somewhere out there in those Pacific Northwest forests, there's a creature that's probably got a scar on its leg and maybe tells its own family the story of the day some human soldiers found it hurt and decided to help instead of harm. And I hope it's living a good life, staying hidden, staying safe. Because if there's one thing that encounter taught me, it's that we're not alone on this planet, and we're definitely not the only intelligent species trying to make our way in the world. We just might be the loudest ones and sometimes the most destructive. But we also might be capable of more kindness and understanding than we give ourselves credit for. That's really all I have to say about it. Take it for what it's worth. Believe it or don't. I understand why someone might think I'm making it all up. But I was there, and I know what I saw, and I know how it felt to look into the eyes of something that shouldn't exist but absolutely did. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still wonder if that creature ever thinks about us, the way I think about it. Whether it remembers the day some strangers helped it when it was hurt and alone. Whether it tells stories to its family about the time it encountered humans who chose compassion over fear. I like to think it does. I like to think that somewhere out there in the deep woods, we're remembered not as threats, but as the ones who stopped to help when help was needed. And maybe that makes us both a little less alone in this big, strange world. That's the story I've been carrying around for all these years. Make of it what you will. For more interesting stories, check this out.